Hello and welcome to QUTV News This Week. I'm Mattison Norris, and today joining us we have a very special guest. Bishop Thomas Paprocki from Springfield is joining us today to help us understand the pandemic from the Catholic perspective. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Good to be with you.
So with politics controlling much of worldviews, how would you say, or do you believe, politics are getting into the church?
Well, I think that's a great question to start with because my undergraduate major at Loyola University of Chicago was in political science. And I was in the college seminary at the time, so people might wonder, well, why would a seminarian be studying political science? But actually it's because there is a close relationship between politics and religion. We think of the separation of church and state, and that's the idea that the church should not be running the civil government and the civil government should not be running the church. But there really is not a big separation between politics and religion because politics are about policies for our nation and for our culture. And so much of what we consider to be policy is informed by our moral principles to do the right thing for the common good. And so religion has a lot to say about that. So that's why our moral tradition, I think, helps to inform public policy, but at the same time, you're asking about how does the public policy affect the church. So in this pandemic, I think we have some principles that we can offer about how to provide for the common good in a pandemic, and then in terms of what the government is telling us, and the churches about not having people in church or not having worship services, that certainly impacts us from a policy point of view, but also impacts us from a legal point of view, because we have the First Amendment to the Constitution is the Bill of Rights, and in the Bill of Rights we have the right to the free exercise of religion. So it's always a question of trying to balance these, and so that's why we need to have a lot of conversation between church officials, government officials, when we're looking at questions like what's an appropriate way to respond to a pandemic, and at the same time, how do we continue to exercise our religion freely.
So you actually also came out with an essay. Would you briefly tell us what that is about?
Yeah, so the essay that was published by the National Catholic Bioethics Center in their newsletter, Ethics and Medics, is called Social Shutdowns as an Extraordinary Means of Saving Human Lives. And what prompted me to write that was over the last few months, I've been thinking about what we've been doing in terms of shutting things down, telling people to stay at home, don't go to work, don't go to school, don't go to church. That's extraordinary. It's never happened in my lifetime, and so to do something like that, the word extraordinary just kept popping back into my mind, and it reminded me of that terminology in medical ethics and the distinction that we make between using ordinary and extraordinary means to save life. And many of us have faced that when you have perhaps a family member or someone you know that's dying of some terminal illness. And then you face the question, what kind of medical treatment do you have to provide for someone who's dying? And so we want to provide ordinary care for them, in terms of what they need to be comfortable and free from pain. But we don't have to do extraordinary things like hooking them up to all kinds of machines to keep their heart pumping and their lungs breathing and IVs and feeding tubes and all. That's extraordinary, and we don't do that. And so we make those distinctions in individual cases. So my argument is that it should also be applied to society as a whole, that we should do ordinary things. So like in a pandemic, we should be doing things like safe distancing and hygiene and washing your hands and cleaning surfaces and using masks, things like that are ordinary, but without necessarily shutting everything down. And I raise that question now because what happens if there's another wave or if there's another serious flu? I've seen other countries already, Israel and other countries in Europe are doing another wave of shutdowns, and I would hope rather than shutting everything down again, that we would look at ways to do things more ordinary means. And an example I use in my essay is about traffic fatalities. So in the United States, over 35,000 people have died every year in traffic accidents since 1951. So 35,000 people, that's a lot of people. So you think, well, we want to save every life possible. Well, to prevent anyone from dying in an auto accident, we should close our highways and not get in our cars and just don't drive. Well, we don't do that because that would be extraordinary. So we do the ordinary things. We use seat belts and airbags, and we follow the rules of the road. And so that's what I'm saying we should do. Is I'm not just saying throw caution to the wind. We have, with the pandemic, we have to take cautions, but we should take more ordinary precautions and not the extraordinary things of just shutting everything down.
So why do you feel as though it's so important for people to read, but not only read, also thoroughly understand your article?
I think it's important because it provides, I think, some vocabulary from a moral tradition that helps to shape the conversation, because I get the sense from a lot of people there's a gut feeling that will tend towards a conclusion. For example, children should be back in school. But why is that? You know, so to be able to talk about that. And so our schools the Catholic schools are reopened, for example, and I hear from parents, and I hear from teachers, I even hear from students how happy they are to be back in school. I never thought I'd hear young children saying they're happy to be back in school, but they are. And so what they're saying is we have a sense that the ordinary means are for us to be back in school. Pediatricians are saying that as well, and child psychologists, that they need to be in person. And so we're listening to that branch of science when they say that. But at the same time, to use the proper precautions. So when our children are in school, they are using safe distancing and wearing masks and using hygiene and washing their hands. We're doing the ordinary things, but at the same time, we have not taken the extraordinary step of shutting everything down and telling our children not to come to school.
Well, thank you so much, Bishop Thomas Paprocki, for joining us today. If you have any more questions, email us at QUmedia@quincy.edu. You can also follow us at QUmedia.net or on all of our QUTV social media platforms. For QUTV News, I'm Mattison Norris. Stay safe and wear your mask.